Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a public meeting of the Standing Committee of Tynwald on the Constitutional, Legal Affairs and Justice Committee. I'm Tanya August Phillips, MLC, and I chair this committee. With me are Laurie Hooper, MHK, and Stu Peters, MHK. Before we begin, can we make sure that phones are on silent, laptops on silent? Today we welcome the Chief Minister, the Honourable Alfred Cannon, MHK, and also the Director of External Relations, Chris Brannigan. And for the benefit of Hansard and anyone listening, can you please introduce yourselves, including your title and how long you've been in post?
Alfred Cannon, Chief Minister since October 2021.
Chris Brannigan, Executive Director of Crown and External Relations, and I've been in position since November 2024.
Thank you. I think we'll start with the remit of the Director of External Relations, and Mr. Hooper, MHK, will lead on that.
Thank you very much. So a really straightforward question. What is the remit of your role? I appreciate you've only been in post a couple of months.
Very broadly, I'm responsible for ensuring that I provide quality advice to the Chief Minister, the Council of Ministers and the Chief Executive Officer of the Isle of Man Government on international, constitutional and Crown matters, as well as acting as a senior representative and a spokesman for the Isle of Man Government with external partners.
Okay, so when you talk about acting as a spokesman, what does that entail?
So I primarily provide representative communications for the Isle of Man Government in a variety of scenarios, a variety of settings, or off island, I should say.
Okay, so that you would describe yourself perhaps as the Isle of Man Government's point person then for engagement and negotiation with the United Kingdom and Channel Islands?
Certainly in terms of enabling communication that takes place, then in that role as a conduit between the Isle of Man Government and other governments, then I'm primarily responsible for ensuring that that conduit is available and that that communication is enabled.
And how does that then contrast with your Crown role, which is much more an internal role, I would imagine?
I think that let me start with the overlap of those two roles. I think the overlap between them is to ensure that the relationship, whether it is on one of our themes of engagement, whether that's on a political or official level, occurs to ensure that there is an alignment and an integration of both responsibilities. So, for example, if we're looking at what occurs within the Crown role and what occurs in terms of royal assent or any matter that deals with legal jurisdictions, then those are aligned with what the government's objectives are and they're aligned with what the political approach is going to be. So it's really a question, Mr. Hooper, of ensuring that I've got that right degree of coordination and synchronisation, integration between both of those sort of two roles. In terms of how they differ, one is official and one is primarily political. That's the distinction I would use in sort of layman's terms.
So you describe your role as quite strategic then, in outlook?
I think that the remit of my role is very strategic. I work towards strategic objectives. I work towards the strategic objectives for the island's national interests. I look to extend the realisation of those objectives into the medium term and the long term, as well as understanding that there are short-term objectives to be met.
Okay, and you say you took up post in November 2024. Yes. I wonder, Chief Minister, if you could just remind us, when was the previous Director of External Relations in post until?
Off the top of my head, I'll have to check the accurate date on that, but I think we were without that role being filled or without position being filled for some months. I'll have to check the accurate, I think it was 6 months or more. In fact, yeah, about the 1st of March, I think, from that date, we did not have our director in, and Mr. Brannigan was then filled from November.
Is there a reason that it took so long for the government to fill that quite important strategic post?
To the best of my knowledge, I mean, I think after the departure of the previous incumbent, it was just then a process of gathering thoughts around the actual job description, person specification, and going out to recruit them. These roles traditionally would take 3 or more months to recruit to, so 6 months between leaving and filling the post, I would suggest, is not unusual at that sort of senior level executive position, particularly if their departure is relatively quick.
So I'll ask you the same question I asked the Home Affairs Minister earlier. Do you think that time period and that gap represents perhaps a lack of resilience inside the Crown External Relations team inside the Cabinet Office?
I think the team itself is very experienced. We have some very experienced officers who have a lot of in-depth knowledge. So actually, because of that experience, because of that depth of knowledge that is contained within that particular team and group of individuals, I think there's minimal risk to the government as a result of the senior departure. But nevertheless, to have that director of external relations in is ultimately necessary. But for short periods, 6 months or even 12 months, were there to be a gap, I know that actually the experience and expertise and value in terms of the advice being offered to ministers and indeed the programme of work that we were being undertaken could still be completed.
So the fact there was a gap doesn't concern you unduly then in this case?
Look, I mean, I think, there's clearly been, Mr. Brannigan's brought a raft of different experience, including a proper insight into senior ministers' workings and dealings within Westminster, so has brought perhaps a slightly different slant to the role in terms of expertise and experience. But did it ultimately impact our ability and capabilities when it came to external relations? I would say we were resilient enough to be able to deal with any events that we faced up to. But certainly, I mean, since Mr. Brannigan's been in post, we've looked again at our engagement and how that is being undertaken. His experience has helped us perhaps refocus some of the approaches that we've needed within that respect. So, look, it's always a concern when there's not a senior position in post for such an important role. But again, I would say that particular department in government has significant experience within the individuals who are employed.
Okay. You mentioned just now that part of your job is delivering on the Isle of Man strategic objectives, so in relation to our kind of external relations approach. Is there anywhere that those strategic directives for external relations are set out?
There is a draft plan which we've looked at in terms of an international relations strategy. When I took up post, I had taken my sort of first view of it. It looks more like a plan than a strategy at the moment, so it describes more of what we think we ought to do. What it would benefit from is some refinement over the alignment of activities that run across the whole of government. So, for example, more refinement and alignment in the activities that are undertaken by the Department for Enterprise and, for example, for the Tax Office, to ensure that we're working toward commonly agreed objectives that work in the medium to long-term benefit for the Isle of Man. So, in an era where naked national self-interest is coming to the fore, understanding what that national interest might be and how we can all collectively work toward it is a piece of work that's ongoing. So effectively, this is my 4th month in the role. It's taken a little bit of time to develop understanding of it, take a little bit of time to understand, quite what can be achieved within the resourcing that we have, and that is on its way to becoming a much more refined and capable piece of strategic work that many people can use rather than it being an internal document.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because in the Cabinet Office's 2023 department plan, there was an intention to develop an external relations strategy. Clearly that didn't happen in 23-24. That objective then disappeared from the 2024 department plan. There was no reference to it. So I'm really glad to hear that work is actually still ongoing. Chief Minister, is there a reason that it has taken so long for the Cabinet Office to develop an external relations strategy?
Well, I think partly because of the transition in terms of senior leadership into the role, and I think partly because these things do require some thought in terms of exactly how a strategy is properly enabled, and it is a thought process that doesn't necessarily just involve direct political to political representation, but potentially more broadly across government in some other areas, for example, economic representation as well. So, yeah, it's a document that Mr. Brannigan says is currently in development, and we are, I think, intending to bring it before the Council of Ministers fairly imminently.
But I think my question is, in 2023 we had a head of external relations. In 2024 you did up until sort of the first half of the year, but there doesn't appear to have been any progress there. So the ambition was to do this in 2023. We're now in 2025, and we now have a strategy that's more a plan than a strategy. I'm just a bit concerned that your answer is the reason it's taken so long is because of a gap that you weren't unduly concerned about 5 minutes ago. But that gap happened right at the end of this process, not right at the start. So is there a reason that where we are now, we're still waiting to see what this strategy might look like, even though it's 2 years further down the line from when the Cabinet Office originally said they'd have it done?
I think been a number of factors behind that, including obviously the prioritisation of work, recruitment of a new director of external relations, and of course actually coming to terms with what a strategy actually looks like and defining it in a tangible way. But that's not to say, particularly in my own mind, I'm not being clear about what the policy objectives are in terms of external representation, particularly from my own perspective, and I think that we've seen and evidenced quite a lot of success around that, and I think things have continued to develop in terms of what the requirements of that external relationship role are, and I would say, although I've been obviously Chief Minister since October 2021, prior to that as Treasury Minister, I did go with the Chief Minister on quite a few engagements, and there's been a definitive shift in that relationship, pre-Brexit and post-Brexit, and particularly since we've been through our sort of gap, if you like, in terms of general elections, etc. So, the role has continued to develop. I think just because there hasn't been a strategy in writing attached to it, I think there are demonstrable, clear evidence of progress. In terms of how we have represented the island, what we've sought to achieve by that representation, and we will be rectifying the matter in terms of having a written document within the next 3 months.
So do you think that even though you don't have a written document that kind of codifies this, do you think there is a good understanding of what the island's strategic objectives are in relation to your external relations approach? And do you think that is a shared understanding across government? Like you say, you mentioned DFE and other departments.
Yeah, I do. I do think there is a good understanding of what we are, tasked to do in terms of building our profile, representing the Isle of Man, giving assurance. I think at political level, all political levels. Not just senior government ministers, but across parties in Westminster and indeed with our devolved administrations, that we are a responsible self-governing jurisdiction. I think clearly there is an element in terms of dealing with the tangible issues of the day, and whether that is sanctions or whether that is discussions around our involvement from renewable energy perspective and our need to be involved with CFD rounds in the United Kingdom. And thirdly, to seek further opportunities for the island, whether they be as a result of those specific discussions, but also to look for potential economic opportunities as well. And I think, for example, the visit last week from the South African High Commissioner was an example of where we would look to cement and develop the relationship, again at political level, but leading on to the economic perspective, that we are a responsible jurisdiction and we're looking for those relationships to be mutually beneficial on both sides. So yeah, I do think actually there's been a sort of ingrained understanding of what we are doing in terms of our external relations approach. I accept that actually putting some of that into a strategy is helpful. But of course, perhaps not all of it is tangible, if you see what I mean, because actually some of the time you are reacting to events. So getting that translated then into definitive measures of success are not always possible, and that's why it will probably be a high-level document rather than a very specific.
So I'm glad you touched on the economic side of things. I think a phrase you used, Mr. Brannigan, was as we're entering an era of naked self-interest. I think that was a careful allusion to what's going on at the moment with the US and tariffs. Clearly that is going to be a big issue for the island in terms of economic opportunity. The UK will be making our response for us, almost. We have a shared customs agreement, shared revenue agreement. Whatever the UK decides to do in response, that will be the Isle of Man's response, as it were. Can you maybe give us some information on what engagement there's been with the UK about their response to these recent tariff announcements?
So do you want to answer, Chief? I mean, I can answer that. Certainly, I mean, I think as Chief Minister's alluded to, I mean, part of our successful ongoing engagement, and of course I would just put this in the context of suggesting that one of the reasons that change of UK government in the summer last year over a period of tension, as that set of priorities changes, of course, issuing a strategy both in the absence of a director and in a changing scenario could be seen as potentially premature. That changing UK government is, of course, an external factor as to where the island sits. So once there's a consistency in those objectives, there's always a period in any strategic laydown where you will adjust that to meet the requirements as they come through. So as part of the increased political engagement that we've had in recent months, Chief Minister received a letter from Douglas Alexander, who's the Minister of State for Trade Policy and Economic Security, on Friday, outlining the United Kingdom's response to the announcement of those tariffs. We've been watching both, not only that as guidance, but I think that's a very strong indicator that, both to the Chief Minister and to the other Crown dependencies, there's an inclusion of the Isle of Man within the British family that ensures that we're clear, there's transparency from the very outset about what the United Kingdom government's response is going to go and be, how that might affect us upon the island, and that allows us to take our own view and our own position.
So it sounds like the UK government have made a decision on their response and are informing us of their decision. Doesn't feel like that was something where they wrote out to us and said, actually, what is going to be the impact of this decision? Can you let us know before we finalise it?
Sure.
Feels like a very different kind of conversation.
So I think that some of the content of the letter confirms that there is a dialogue ongoing. This is still extraordinarily early, and even following today's news stories of looking at how different markets in different regions have reacted differently over different time zones to what's occurred. Actually, the letter from Minister Alexander is clear about the fact that there is a dialogue ongoing and that our interests are represented within that, and that we shouldn't be merely the recipients of it, but we have some part within it as well.
So aside from that letter that's come from the United Kingdom, has been any other engagement, any conversations, any meetings, any correspondence between the Isle of Man government and the UK government?
Not on tariffs.
Not on tariffs. That's the only conversation. But politically, it's a very current issue, and I think the response from Minister Alexander is probably it's extraordinarily proactive on the UK government. Having worked in UK government, I consider that's a very fast response from a very busy minister on a very sensitive topic.
So we have had issues in the past, and there was a recent House of Commons Justice Committee report that pertains to this, where the UK has taken decisions in relation to trade negotiations that have affected the island, but actually hasn't gone through a consultative exercise with us. Do you feel there's any risk of that happening here?
I can refer to the recent reports from the Justice Committee and the government's response to the Justice Committee, acknowledging that the Select Committee's report was for a previous government, and of course is now being adjusted by the current government, which includes a significant amount of consideration as to how measures will be taken to prevent that from happening again. So they're aware of the sensitivities that occurred the last time, they're aware of the issues that had arisen from it, and have made a very clear set of recommendations, which the UK government has accepted, that they would ensure doesn't cause a similar situation to arise in the future.
So, slightly turning it on its head then, the UK government have written to us. There hasn't been any other engagement with the UK government over this particular issue. How are you ensuring then that coordination with local businesses that may be impacted by some of these decisions, some of the businesses that have international supply chains, or maybe are American companies themselves, how are you making sure that their position and their views are being taken into account as part of this ongoing dialogue that you mentioned that is supposedly now happening with the UK?
So what we understand at the moment, I mean, the position is unclear at the moment. It's far too early to properly understand what impact that this will have directly on whatever businesses on the island. But of course, everything that's going on at the moment could have relative indirect impacts around the cost of goods. So in fact, could have, rather than just single business issues, could have much broader impacts for us all at the moment. And and that's impossible for us to really try and get ahead of the game by understanding what those impacts are, particularly as this tariff position could change almost effectively daily, depending on who's negotiating at that particular time. I think what I would say to you is that, my understanding from having spoken via the Chief Executive Officer to Department for Enterprise is that, it could have benefits both ways. It's not necessarily a detrimental impact for those businesses that are directly involved, that we know about, that are directly involved in the supply of goods into that market, and there may be other opportunities as a result of those tariff increases, either in other potentially in other markets for some of that export business, to be delivered. So it's very hard. I mean, I think for us at the moment to sort of be able to even go to the United Kingdom and say this is going to be a terrible thing, it's going to negatively impact on us, when actually the truth is we're still at such an early stage with this that it's really hard to determine. I think there's one business on the island that I'm aware of that may have some negative impacts, but until the full picture becomes clear, then we're only then really, would we be in a position. What I would say to you is that, we've had quite a number of discussions with the United Kingdom around trade, the free trade agreements particularly. We have been included for goods. Our issue at the moment is being included for services. So the CPTPP, that free trade agreement, which was signed and sealed recently, we were on for goods, but we weren't on for services. The Gulf Cooperation Council is where they're looking at the latest free trade agreement. Again, we know we're in for goods. We continue to represent our position, particularly alongside the other Crown dependencies, for services. But I would say to you that generally the relationship in terms of the communications has been really good over the last 3 or 4 years. It's hard for me to necessarily benchmark that specifically against the time period before, but I would say that fundamentally that relationship between the Isle of Man, the Crown dependencies and the United Kingdom when it comes to trade particularly has been very good, and credit to the new government. They really have been positive. I've had a meeting with the Prime Minister alongside the other Crown dependencies. I think it's the first time for a decade plus that we've actually had a proper one-to-one meeting. There was a very specific agenda around renewable energy and the benefits that the island could bring in terms of our renewable programs to the United Kingdom. And indeed the United Kingdom did produce their own piece of work which said that the Crown dependencies as a whole attributed to 14% of all foreign direct investment going into the United Kingdom. I would, and both those particular items are providing us significant leverage in terms of our discussions, and I think a real recognition on the United Kingdom side that this relationship is one to be understood and one to be valued and to be built on where we can. So, I think if we did reach out to the Secretary of State and flag a significant issue, I expect, given the relationships at the moment, that there would be an immediate channel of communications allowed. So I think that we should draw some confidence from that, and accepting, of course, and from the letter in which the Minister Secretary of State wrote to us unsolicited, and finishes it off by, I look forward to working closely with the Crown dependencies going forward. So
I think it's the unsolicited nature of the letter that, on the one hand, is good, but that's what concerns me. I would have expected the Isle of Man government to be proactive in this space and to have reached out to the UK Secretary of State or the Minister for Trade and actually just said, by the way, guys, don't forget about us. I mean, it's great that the UK are on the ball. It doesn't feel like we are.
I think that though those conversations have taken place around trade and our position, as I said, I'm confident that we have reached a position where there is a very proactive attempt to ensure that the Isle of Man is being factored into these discussions. We've seen, in the last 4 years, we've seen, changes, for example, to fishing quotas, which has been hugely positively received. And I think that actually, the recognition that we've received in terms of our ministerial meetings, agendas, particularly being highlighted by, the Prime Minister in November, and that was a very powerful meeting to be able to have, particularly now as you talk to DESNZ or any other parts of government, has given us some considerable leverage. So I accept the point you're making, but I would say that actually, I think we should have confidence that we are being thought about at the highest level. And I wonder, indeed, whether even that unsolicited letter would have been received previously. So.
Okay. And just sort of sticking with this level of proactivity that we're talking about here, but internally, but externally to the government, so internally to the Isle of Man, to inform some of those conversations around things like tariffs and any other issues that may well crop up in future. Are we being proactive about engaging with industry who may be concerned or who may have contacted? Has there been any contact with government more broadly from industry, and has the External Relations team and yourself, Chief Minister, reached out and into those areas where we can actually have those more engaging conversations with industry directly?
So this has been a matter really for the Department for Enterprise. I've spoken to the chief officer at the Department for Enterprise. I know that they are working closely with the business community on this, but as I said, it's been very difficult to actually know because nobody actually knew the extent of what those tariffs were. And of course, as I've just alluded to, we're still trying to understand, what the impact of that is, and that's unclear because, I think the early conversations that have been had with a number of businesses have been that, for example, that one business has reported that if they are negatively impacted, they believe they can take their goods possibly into other markets because that exposure will be there from the change and alterations in behaviour. And of course, the other business wasn't sure at this stage, because it's quite high-end goods, as to how much that sort of 10% differential would actually make because of the level that they're already selling their goods into. So, look, I'd just say that Department for Enterprise have been fully on top of this now. They are working with any impacted businesses. Have reached out, I understand, to businesses who they know have been impacted, are encouraging businesses to reach out to them if they've got impacts, and we will see the picture unroll and unravel over the next few months.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, moving on.
A couple of questions about Brussels and London, if I may. At our previous meeting in February 2023, just over 2 years ago, Mr David Corlett, although not having the figures to hand at the hearing, suggested that the cost of the Brussels office was in the region of £80,000 a year at that time. Do we know what it's costing this year?
It costs roughly the same.
About the same.
We're in a bracket of £80,000 to £90,000 a year.
Okay. How does the government assess the value of the Brussels office?
The Brussels office provides a considerable ability to monitor developments within the European Union, and then to be able to provide trade feedback and policy feedback to the government, which extends into a number of different areas. So not only on government-to-government business, but looking at the EU as they operate as a whole, but certainly in finance and in areas where we know we've had monitored development and interests. So our take on it is essentially a listening watch over what goes on within Brussels. Our EU representative is extraordinarily well connected. He had previously worked for the City of London Corporation as their representative in Brussels. His ability to be able to exercise judgment and engagement through direct face-to-face engagement has a value in itself, as well as him sort of occupying that space. And he's a well-respected figure. So some of that value can have a tangible effect. We can look at things that we have saved in terms of our understanding of trade, so that businesses on the island don't fall foul of any new regulation. But equally, there's a value in the fact that he is a go-to and known personality within Brussels circles that enables that conduit of discussion to take place. Precisely the question I answered earlier with Mr. Hooper about what we do in London it's having those channels of communication that are open to us that provide sort of intrinsic value. So despite the fact that, you know, the United Kingdom is no longer an EU member, the activity levels that occur within Brussels are, you know, remain of value and relevance to Isle of Man business.
Still, as much as pre-Brexit, I could understand why it was important to have somebody when we were linked in to Europe via Protocol 3, but less so now, I would think, intuitively.
But some of those issues still remain. So tax issues remain valid, especially issues over, you know, double tax arrangements. Anti-money laundering legislation and data protection still remain relevant for Isle of Man businesses. We can take an approach because we've got somebody in Brussels who has a view that's aligned with what the other Crown dependencies are thinking of. So both in those three areas, and as part of our requirement to be able to deal with what goes on within the Brussels machine, our representative there provides that feedback through us through not only his processing of the information, but his judgment on the information as well. And I think that also contains an intrinsic value.
Okay, let's look closer to home then, because I was fortunate enough to go on a CPA trip to Westminster when I was first elected, and got to meet the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, and he said to the group of us that he thought we were underrepresented in London, in Westminster, and that we ought to have a permanent fixture there. What are your views on that?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, probably best I answer, because it's partly political. I mean, coming to terms with the value of a representative office, you know, remains a big question. You know, we do a lot of engagement in terms of, we now have a quarterly program of visits from myself and the Director of External Relations, you know, and we undertake to have calls and communications on an ongoing basis. So the actual political presence is one issue in terms of the actual value one is going to have by having somebody on the ground, and the cost and the investment that is required. You know, and we know the cost pressures, obviously, that government's over, and we have looked since the Cladge report. I think we said that we would look at this on an ongoing basis. We have been looking at this. Getting the balance right between a proper representative office, something that properly represents the Isle of Man externally as well in terms of the visuals impact of an office, versus getting a shoebox on the 5th floor of a random building. You know, it's a difficult balance to take, and also the numbers of staff that are required. I would suggest, you know, we'll need as a minimum 2 staff, and there's going to be additional support, probably secretarial support, and other costs associated with it. I think it's probably fair to say that we would not be short of a few £100,000 in terms of that investment for an office, in terms of, you know, everything that would come with it, including the staff numbers. And also one needs to balance that out between the economic benefits as well, because I think there is an overlap, and Jersey certainly from their perspective have that political representation, but they also have economic representation down there. They have a slightly different economic model and look for perhaps more focus on funds and investment business than perhaps we do. But, you know, we continue to evaluate it. But I think from an external relations perspective, I acknowledge the conversation that Lindsay Hoyle and, you know, his comments to you. I think I've had a similar conversation with him, but it's about getting the balance right, and we haven't got to that stage yet of just really being clear what are the tangible benefits of a London office and what we would actually want in terms of its profile and responsibilities.
I suspect that Jersey must think that it's good value for them, so I wonder whether or not that, you know, that same plan would work for us, and also whether there are any synergies between us and Jersey, and whether or not we could maybe share facilities. I appreciate that in some ways we're competitors to them, but you know, maybe we don't need to have a palace down there. Maybe we can work in cooperation.
I don't think, you know, it's certainly not, you know, I don't mean to imply a palace, but you certainly need to have an office that is presentable and representative, one that one would have some pride in, in terms of meeting external visitors and being properly facilitated in order to be effective. So, we continue to look at it and consider it.
Okay. Relationship between the Isle of Man and the UK government. Since the 2024 UK election, what communications taking place between the Isle of Man and the new Labour government? You mentioned earlier that you'd had a meeting there last week. So are you happy with that relationship as it develops?
Yeah, as I said, we've had very strong and positive communications as far as I'm concerned. I guess somewhat nervous before the election as to how that change of government would be received in terms of the relationship between the UK government and the Crown Dependencies and the Isle of Man. I think it has been a positive relationship. As I've said before when I was answering Mr. Hooper's questions, I think I would point to certainly the recognition around the foreign direct investment that is coming into the country. I think the Labour Party have shown a clear commitment to want to try and understand that better, but also to look to encourage it. We have had good open door communications when it has come to discussing renewable energy. I think the fact, as I said it before, that we've been to this most senior office in the land in terms of the Prime Minister for a good 20-25 minute meeting, and we have met other ministers. So there is nothing to suggest to me that it has been otherwise than courteous, and I would say workmanlike and very professional. So far, so good.
It does sound like a lot of the diplomatic outreach crosses over into sort of potential business leads as well for the island. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, it does so. I mean, I think particularly when you are looking at that sort of ambassadorial High Commissioner aspect, that is certainly an area. I think the Lord Mayor of London, that is another fundamentally a business relationship that we're looking at. And I think, for example, the Memorandum of Understanding with Liverpool City Region, a part that was certainly significantly built on that sort of economic value and trying to look to see how both parties could share resources and expertise and an understanding and a mutual recognition of the value that we can bring to each other through, for example, tourism. But also there have been stronger relationships in the last 2 or 3 years between Department for Enterprise, the agencies and the Chambers of Commerce in that area. So I think we've built on that. We've again looked to enhance that relationship at political level. So there is an element of public service about that. I hope that we'll see that come out of that Memorandum of Understanding in terms of sharing best practice and perhaps having a clear line of sight for senior officers to share information and discuss things, but also absolutely on the economic side as well.
And on that point, I think I'd probably best declare my role as political member for Finance Isle of Man, particularly in relation to the MOU with Liverpool. But it leads on to my next question, which is very much directed at Mr. Brannigan. But with the next international relations strategy for the island, how will you ensure that it dovetails diplomatic goals with economic strategy goals?
That's a very good question. I think we've been certainly in dialogue since I started the role, looking at where there's a synergy between each of those different strands. And my approach toward our national strategy would be that on each of the strands of activity that we would want to pursue, whether that's economic, diplomatic, political, ministerial, whatever theme that would work to, but my aim would be to have a strategy that enabled each of those different activity strands to progress unimpeded, but in concert with each other. So without imposing any sort of limitations on it. And that simply takes a while to get that fullest understanding from both sides about what it is we're aiming to go and do. I think that the primary purpose of the external relations strategy is to enable much of that dialogue to sort of take place. So if there is an event, the Chief Minister's referred to the British Irish Council and our breakfast meeting with the Prime Minister, Part of that was to think about what we wanted to have within the purpose of the meeting, the objectives of the meeting, and the outcome of that meeting, to then enable what we were going to be able to do across government as a whole. So thinking is going into this. More of that thinking will develop to ensure that we're all singing from the same song sheet toward one choral triumph, if I could put it that way. By the time we get to toward the end of it, there should be a crescendo that works to our benefit. So the answer to your question is essentially more consultation between each of those different departments. I speak regularly both. I'm part of the Economic National Strategy Board. I'm involved in that discussion as that sort of takes place. So that developing of that understanding to ensure that we've got something that is effective and has utility is the goal that we're aiming for, as the Chief Minister referenced, over the space of the next couple of months.
And you're confident that we're going to do well there?
Of course.
Space. My next question is just as Chief Minister, and it's regarding, and he won't be unused to this particular kind of questioning, but traditionally, obviously, you take the lead for external relations, that would sit with the Chief Minister. In Jersey, that area is shared with a Minister for External Relations. So in future, could we see a Minister for External Relations, do you think?
Look, I mean, I think that would be a matter for the future Chief Minister. I have to say, I mean, yes, I do normally meet the external relations ministers, but equally, I quite often see the Chief Ministers represented as well. So, most recent discussions have seen a variety of combinations being put forward by Jersey and Guernsey. And I've certainly seen a lot of the Chief Minister of Guernsey, and a little less so, but still not uncommon to see the Chief Minister of Jersey at these meetings as well. So I would say that we are doing a good job in terms of representation. Of course, you could have an external relations minister. I mean, it's perfectly feasible to have another minister at the table, but it is equally manageable as the Chief Minister to deal with the external relations element.
Thank you. Steve, if you'd like to continue.
Going back about 6 months, November 24, it was resolved that Tynwald was of the opinion that legislation made by the UK Parliament should not be extended to the Isle of Man without the consent of Tynwald. What sort of discussions have you had with the UK about that? What kind of feedback have you had?
So, we did write to various ministers from all three Crown dependencies about the response actually from the UK government to the Justice Committee report. We specifically highlighted the permissive extent clauses and, of course, sought to emphasise that they should only be undertaken following consultation with the Crown dependencies. Those discussions or that emphasis is repeated as often as possible, particularly when we are meeting new representatives, political representatives, in terms of our position, and we continue to emphasise that position to the Ministry of Justice. I would say that the Ministry of Justice has sought to communicate across Whitehall in respect of our position, in respect of our constitutional position. We haven't now seen any sort of changes or specific alterations. We will clearly see when the next permissive extent clause arises, but I can say that that position continues to be emphasised in terms of our requirement for consultation to be undertaken before a PEC is.
And no major pushback from the other side on that.
No.
Final question from me then. How long is the turnaround from sending a piece of legislation to the Ministry of Justice for process from royal assent to it being received back in the Isle of Man? Are we happy with the timescale involved in that?
I think we are. I think both on the basis of observations in the past. I think in terms of observations made by the Justice Select Committee toward the UK government to say, this has got to sit within a timeframe. There have inevitably, as I understand it, historically been bumps in the way that process has taken place. But both as the Chief Minister has previously referenced, the relationship between the Ministry of Justice, with its responsibility for the Crown dependencies, and other ministries and departments of the United Kingdom government has improved in both developing the understanding to assure that might be the case, so that it sits within a recognised norm. That some of that legislation may take a little bit longer. For example, assisted dying might take a little bit longer than normal for reasons that are reflected in what's going within sort of UK government. But there is a set turnaround times that people will always work toward with their objectives. When we talk to the Ministry of Justice team weekly, essentially to ensure that we're in consultation with them and have that formal meeting to see what that progress is and how it's taking place. So there's a very regular dialogue both between us and with other parts of the United Kingdom government to ensure that they understand what pace that's going at and how quickly that's progressing. So I think the tempo on that is acceptable and within the parameters set out within their own guidelines for the UK government.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is one more question on the trips that the Chief Minister and other members of COMIN have had to the United Kingdom over the course of this year. Could you outline what those were?
I can indeed.
Thank you.
Highlight those for you. If you just bear with me 1 second. I am specifically.
Yeah, this is it. This is the last 12 months for you.
So, April 24, we did a Q2 engagement with the Lord Chancellor, met Margaret Hodge, Stephen Doughty MP, obviously prior to the election, Lord Offord, who is the Under Secretary of State for Exports, and Sir Bob Neal, who's Chairman of the Justice Committee. May, we met with our Jersey counterparts. June was the BIC summit, which took place on the Isle of Man. In July, I attended the state opening of Parliament and took the opportunity to meet Tulip Sadiq. In September, Q3 engagement with Douglas Alexander, Minister of State for Trade, Lord Ponsonby, who's our new Parliamentary Under Secretary for Ministry of Justice, Labour Party conference, Conservative Party conferences, Lord Mayor of London in October, Q4 engagement November, Joint Ministerial Council reception with Stephen Doughty, MP, Minister of State, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, BIC in Edinburgh, met the Prime Minister, Pat McFadden, various other ministers. Happy to provide this list in its entirety. January 25, Q1 ministerial engagement, met a number of MPs, including Luke Murphy, Sarah Champion, John Glenn MP. Q2 engagement in March, Lord Ponsonby, Dan Jarvis, the Security Minister, to talk about beneficial ownership, sat alongside the other Crown dependencies, and I think represented the case in terms of the Isle of Man's position when it came to beneficial ownership and the interaction with the EU justice system at present. March 25, Liverpool MOU signing, and last week I was down in London for the APPG. We've reformed the all-party parliamentary group, and that is now up and running. So I did attend the very first inaugural meeting of the new grouping, and of course met the South African High Commissioner on his visit to the island. But I'm very happy to get that list across to you.
Thank you.
That would be really helpful, actually. One thing that jumped out at me, actually, apart from the visit to Liverpool, you just described over a year's worth of activity there, but there doesn't appear to have been any engagement with the devolved administrations, no engagement with, for example, the mayors in the northwest, so the Liverpool City region, Manchester. That feels like an oversight to me. It feels like there must have been things going on that's on a bigger list somewhere. If you could share that would be helpful. But it feels like all of the focus there is very much on Westminster, whereas a lot of our economic links, for example, are with the North West or even with other parts of the UK.
So those meetings have happened within the framework of which I've just told you. I mean, obviously, British Irish Council, all the devolved administrations are represented. We take the time to have an individual meeting with each of the main administrations and the chief ministers or first ministers. So those meetings happen twice a year with Jersey Guernsey formally. Jersey Guernsey, for example, were present when I met the security minister, so we had three CDs meeting then, and we took the opportunity to meet in London prior to going on to that meeting. Similarly, when we've had other discussions with the Ministry of Justice when we've been in London, we've normally sought to meet the three CDs if they've been present as well. In terms of the mayors and the North West, I would point to particularly the Labour Party conference, so we take the opportunity to meet, certainly met Steve Rotherham at the last Labour Party conference. We continue to build that link in terms of opportunities with the Northern Powerhouse. There's nothing in this 12-month period, but certainly prior to that, we did have quite extensive engagement with the Northern Powerhouse. But they are normally linked into the conferences, and that is a particularly good time to see them. So I would say that, and I think the MOU with Liverpool is a very good example of having built that relationship with Liam Robinson and Steve Rotherham. Steve Rotherham actually over the last 3 or 4 years, and Liam Robinson, who I met at the last Labour Party conference. So look, we do see them, and we do certainly that our counterparts in the Crown dependencies, and when opportunity arises, very much with the North West as well.
Could I add something to that, Chief?
Yeah, of course.
So in addition to the engagements that the Chief Minister's pointed out, I attend to the Convention of the North, which is the meeting of all of the mayors, metropolitan mayors and regional authorities across the whole of the north of England. So I had the opportunity to be able to go and meet them at an official level and be able to talk to them within that basis. I've engaged with the Manchester Consular Association, so all the diplomatic feed that happens in the northwest of England, which Andy Burnham was present. So there are lots of events that take place slightly below the Chief Minister's level as well, which ensure that dialogue remains open. It's certainly not neglected, and one of the themes behind the Liverpool MOU is to ensure that we could potentially set up further dialogues and further opportunities with other regional authorities and other combined authorities for points in the future.
Thank you. So how much collaboration, I can hear a lot of the collaboration around sort of various different events and by chance meetings at various different events and sort of putting that time in and that energy in with Jersey and Guernsey. But how often are we communicating with Jersey and Guernsey as our other Crown dependency counterparts? Is it every week? Is it monthly? When is it?
So from my perspective, I have a regular call with the Chief Minister of Guernsey, but actually, our communication absolutely can be measured clearly by the British Irish Council, but also by our visits to the Ministry of Justice, when we will take those quarterly visits to the Ministry of Justice, where we will take that opportunity to meet with the Crown dependencies as well. And look, I mean, I've had quite significant dealings almost on a monthly basis, at times on a daily basis, with my counterparts in the Crown dependencies, particularly on beneficial ownership. There was actually 2 years ago, I think there was significant pressure on us around beneficial ownership and our requirements to deliver the open register versus the EU court ruling, which asked or suggested everybody needed to consider the human right to privacy. So, we continue to discuss that matter as and when appropriate. And, in terms of other tangibles, so, the renewable energy issue is something that the UK are keen to deal with, not on an individual basis, but as a Crown dependency matter, because it's almost certainly going to require some form of legislation, in which case they'll want to legislate for the Crown dependencies. They are sometimes just catch-ups and discussions of the day. Other times they have a very, very clear, tangible agenda.
At an official level, we talk weekly. And actually, sort of post-COVID, Teams has enabled a whole lot more engagement that takes place within that sort of space. So ministerial meetings, as the Chief Minister said, take part regularly. We're next due to have an engagement with them on the 6th and 7th of May. I'm talking to my counterparts in Jersey and Guernsey tomorrow. It's a very regular occurrence.
And in fact, we've had Jersey taking a look at our money val preparations. Absolutely. Following their success of their passing the money val assessment. They've been helping us now by looking at our preparations over here. So, the relationship is strong.
It's robust, yeah.
And just going back to the devolved administrations, but do you think that there could be a greater level of communication between the Isle of Man government and its counterparts in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland?
So as I say, we do look to enhance those relationships at the British Irish Council. I think there are subgroups that also work with their counterparts, and we look to learn where possible.
Yep.
I can't think specifically off the top of my head, but I know in the past that we have had exchange of information about certain policies and operational areas of performance where I think that we've had that opportunity to exchange information and to look at how the devolved administrations have delivered services in particular areas.
And we have there's a member of my team, a member of staff who's in Newcastle County Down today, as part of the preparation for the British Irish Council coming up in June. It's taking part in that face-to-face discussion, not only with the devolved administrations, but with everyone who's involved in the British Irish Council. So that activity at a sub-ministerial level, again, takes place on a face-to-face basis every 6 weeks, every 2 months, something in that sort of space, to complement what, as the Chief Minister described, occurs in specific, objective-driven conversations that are looking for outcomes when we meet face-to-face at the British Irish Council.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We've talked a lot about external relations. I'd like to touch now on the Crown functions that fall within your remit, so specifically around the elections process. I think the Cabinet Office plan does have a number of actions in it, linked to modernisation of the electoral system. Can I just check, is the intention, the language in the Cabinet Office plan is to modernise our electoral system so that we are best in class by 2026. I like that turn of phrase. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I quite like it. Is it the intention to have these proposed changes in place and up and running for the election in September 2026?
So the intention for all changes within the elections have been established on a sort of set timeline. There have been some glitches within those spaces that have been driven by the amount of project time that's been available and by the ability of frankly of getting a bespoke IT system to ensure that that's the case. There have been delays in the project as a whole, which have been not only outside of our own control, but are down to more fundamental issues, such as ensuring that, as with any IT project transfer, what we are not looking to do is jeopardise the ability of voters to be able to take part in the election. So there have been some hedge decisions that have been taken over how rapidly we can put that process into place. But as it stands at the moment, that's still scheduled to take place as advertised.
Can you clarify that? You talk about new IT systems.
Sure.
What is that in respect of?
So essentially making sure that there's a transfer into a more integrated and interoperable process that ensures that more government departments or more parts of the voting system can take place. So transfer of voters' data, for example, the details of what would happen within a particular constituency. In terms of modernising, exactly as you described, Mr. Cheaper, as we aim toward that particular goal, that we ensure that we are not using redundant IT, we're not using something which is unoperable, we're making sure that we have got as an effective technological solution as it's possible to have.
I think we may be talking cross purposes here. Just to clarify, so the proposals in the Cabinet Office plan are to implement some of the recommendations from the Electoral Commission, which are around, for example, enabling people to vote at any polling station within their constituency.
Yeah.
There is some technology element there, so I'm assuming that is something that's been consulted on as part of the amendment bill that is currently has just finished a consultation exercise, I should say.
My mistake.
It's the intention to get that into
cross purposes.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about the project piece as a whole and the longer term ambition of it. Certainly the ability to vote in any polling station with a constituency will be offered to all the local authority general elections, but only two areas, Douglas South and Patrick, have got multiple polling stations available to them. they provide useful feedback before this facility is scaled up for the general election in 2026. That remains the ambition.
Okay, so actually the ability to vote at any polling station, that's going to be operable actually from April this year for the local authority elections.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
So there are only 2 areas that have multiple polling stations. That only applies within those 2 constituency areas.
But then the intention is to have that ready for a more national rollout.
It is, absolutely.
Okay, that's reassuring. Does that need the legislative change to be in place in order for you to do that nationally? Obviously, it's part of the consultation on the bill.
I don't think so. I think that the first reading is scheduled to be achieved before the summer recess.
Okay.
Subsequent secondary legislation amendments will then follow the primary legislation amendment.
And you don't foresee any hiccups or potential roadblocks in getting that legislation through? I mean, it gives you 12 months, give or take, to get that legislation through the branches and all the secondary regulations in. Royal Assent, the whole kit and caboodle in 12 months does feel like it might be a bit tight.
It does. I understand that concern. I think that the planning that has taken place in this, which has gone back for some time, has taken into account other the amount of business that's on the timetable, and they remain assured that this is achievable.
Okay, because there were, I think, 4 pieces of legislation originally on the list in the Cabinet Office plan in relation to elections. Only one of them, it feels, is still coming forward. There was a bill, I think, called the Registration of Electors Amendment Bill. That's been put on hold.
It has been put on hold.
And is that so you could focus resource on the other legislation that needs to happen?
No, so that's part of what I was referring to earlier, that we're working at a line to ensure that there is no obstacle to that taking place due to the how would I describe it? The certainty of ensuring that the technology to enable that doesn't derail the project as a whole.
Okay, that's great. And
So the fudge factor was perceived to be too tight to ensure that the key responsibility here, enabling people to vote, wasn't undone by a piece of technology or an IT project.
that makes sense. And just for anyone listening, that is in respect of allowing individual voter registration as opposed to household voter registration. That's the key part of technology there. Okay, that's really helpful. The other question I've got here is, on that consultation exercise that closed in January, do you have any indication of when the consultation response and results are going to be published? And has anything of interest come out of that consultation that you'd like to highlight to us at this stage?
I don't have that detail in front of me at the moment, I'm afraid.
If you could let us know, that would be useful about the date of publication at least. That would be helpful. And my last question, I think, on elections. In respect of the way the last general election was run, that was run under the new legislation. Obviously, there were some hiccups, some of which have made their way into legislative change, which is what you're consulting on. Operationally, were there any other things learned from the last election process that actually maybe you can now make better, you can implement for the local authority elections later this month, and if not the national elections, then next September?
I can't specifically comment on that, I'm afraid. At this moment, I don't have that detail in front of me, but I'd be happily prepared to provide a written answer to that.
Again, that could be quite useful, just to get an understanding if this bill is going to be going through the House.
Certainly.
I think it would be useful for members to understand some of the underlying issues that were being faced and to be reassured that the bill is going to tackle those elements of it that need legislative change, but also the bits that don't need legislative change, to make sure that actually the Cabinet Office is all over those as well. I'm confident you are and the team are working on this, but just be nice to get that reassurance out there.
I think it would probably be more useful as well, Mr. Hooper, to ensure that we've given you an authoritative written answer rather than just a verbal answer from me at the moment.
Yeah, that would be quite helpful.
And my question kind of like leans into that a little. But in previous administrations, there used to be sort of an international relations briefing given to Tynwald members quarterly or thereabouts. How do you propose to update members more regularly? Obviously, it's a very fast-moving area.
You'll have to forgive me that I'm not familiar with what had happened necessarily in the past before my appointment, but I think that's something that myself and my team would be more than able to be able to put in on a regular basis to provide an update of where we are and what we think is going on more widely.
Perhaps it might help when you're bringing legislation through, instead of just providing a briefing. They'd be very, very aware all the way along. I do have 3 more questions, but I'm just going to go to my members first because I don't want to hog all of the time. One of them's a bit softer. Could more be made of the island's Celtic inheritance regarding our language and arts and culture, and might this be factored into projecting a soft cultural capital?
Well, certainly, I mean, our arts and culture do feature in conversations, particularly with the devolved administrations. Actually, it can be a useful discussion point. It can also encourage openings for greater friendship and relationships. So, and on that sort of basis and that understanding, I think it does help on the political front to know that there is shared heritage. But I would also, I think, well, as we've seen, that can be raised up into cultural links that benefit the economy as well through visits and tourism and education, etc. So look, there are, from that concept, I think it is an important element of what the island's offering is, and why we do have a stronger relationship rather than just purely one with London and Westminster, but of course out through the devolved administrations and of course our friends across the water in Ireland as well.
Could I just add a point to complement what the Chief Minister said? The British Irish Council runs a work stream on minority languages, which is sort of quite an important part of how that is developed. And equally, on signing the Liverpool MOU, although not quite ancient languages, part of that cultural thread was an important consideration in the way that was structured to ensure that we understand the leverage of that soft power as part of how the island is able to influence.
And very quickly, we tried to build on that very much in terms of when we hosted the British Irish Council last year. The fundamentals of that around the Manx language and Manx culture were very much prominent to the fore. And vis-a-vis when we go to other nations and they hold or administrations and they hold their British Irish Council, you will find that they very heavily promote their language, arts and culture as well. So yes, it is an important part of our offering overall.
And Chief Minister, we know from our earlier conversations your recent trip to Westminster and the reconstitution of the UK Isle of Man all-party parliamentary group. What are its priorities? Do we have any idea of or are you able to say what its priorities are over the course of the next 12 months? And what is government's aspirations for those conversations?
Yeah, I think it's more about our aspirations for the all-party parliamentary group. It is about education, it is about learning, it is about us having that forum which we can communicate effectively on issues of the day that are impacting on us, and to build that friendship, that cross-party friendship with the Isle of Man, so that one, they have a greater understanding of our role and our constitution, but B, hopefully that when we need friends we have them. So it is relationship exercise, it's an education exercise, and an important part of our overall communication and relationship with the broader Westminster family, if that's the right word. Business of the day clearly is being done with the government of the day, but that should not stop our broader relationship and communication across the parties, and that we continue to represent the island in the best possible way.
And my last question is slightly more hard-hitting, but in projecting the island's position, are we being sufficiently ambitious in this question goes to both of you. Are we reactive, or are we proactive, or are we both?
I would say that we're very proactive in order to be properly reactive, and that without all the proactive engagement, effective reaction is diminished, I would suggest, and I think the evidence is that we have been proactive in a number of fronts. We still get challenges. Some of those challenges I think come from misconception, but I would say that the evidence is we've not been without our challenges in terms of opinions and views being expressed about the Isle of Man, particularly in national parliaments, and of course we do need to be in a position at times to react to events. For example, beneficial ownership is a good case in point, but to do that effectively and to carry weight with our arguments about our status and our position and our ability for good governance, one has needed to have done that very proactive approach in the beginning.
I think that it's absolutely sort of part of the reality of the geopolitics that we sort of find ourselves in, even at this scale, in that the proactive approach that is being undertaken, that is increasingly sort of being undertaken. So, for example, in this year's plans, or part of the plans that we're looking to develop within the Directorate, is to ensure that we have 20 to 30 champions who sit in the Westminster Parliament, for example. So as the Chief Minister has said, whether that's through the APPG, to educate other people within Westminster who, when the words the Isle of Man are mentioned, have got something positive and constructive to be able to say about that, ensures that when there is a reactive response required, there is more than just the Isle of Man government who are able to say something about it. We have got advocates who sit out inside, not only within Westminster and within Whitehall, as we've already described, but within those devolved administrations. So that is part of a plan of ensuring that some of the things that we want to talk about, that we know are remarkably attractive off the island. One of the best examples being the UNESCO Biosphere, which when we mention it gets extraordinarily positive engagement within Westminster. That's part of running that degree of advocacy. So when there's a reactive piece that we've got to respond to, that proactive work has ensured that the dialogue, the conversation, the discussion, the narrative about the island is already in place.
Thank you. Right, well, thank you very much for coming along today. Chief Minister Alf Cannon and Mr Chris Brannigan, the Director of External Relations. The committee will now sit in private. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.